This is Annabelle Kay from Coffee Clutch, and we are talking this morning about the special rules under GDPR and how this affects children. If you're a member of one of our GDPR groups already, you need to be clear that these requirements are in addition to general GDPR compliance. So we're not going to be covering today how to comply with GDPR in general. We're going to be talking about how the extra rules affect sites that collect children's data. For most of us, this has been a bit of a mission, but let's get going and see if we can make this clear. So, what are the extra rules? Well, let's start with some concepts. The GDPR rules cover, the special GDPR rules, information about children. So that could be that your site or your business, may not have to be on the website, collects information about children. So if you're a childcare provider, a nursery provider, a school, if you run dance classes that involve children, if you have a scout group, any activity where you legitimately need to collect information about children, this covers you, whether or not you've got a website. It also covers websites and businesses that collect information about children that are not necessarily aimed at children. For example, you might run a mum's group where that give you information about their children and you store it or access it in some way. So in your mind, you're not running a business about children, but you still have information about children. This could be true if you have staff and they need time off for dependents care to take care of their kids. They make flexible working applications and tell you this is because they've got children of a certain age. You can end up collecting information about children whether or not you intend to do it. And this is quite distinct from sites that are aimed at children. So if you're marketing at children and trying to get children to sign up to your services directly, that's another ball of wax. So some businesses have no information about children whatsoever. But before you assume this, I suggest you go back through your data protection spreadsheet that you've created, your data audit, and just have a look and ask yourself the question, am I collecting information about children anywhere in the business that I haven't really taken on board? We certainly found that in annual leave conversations and talks about availability for working hours, people often give us information about children, even though we haven't asked for it. In terms of sites aimed at children, the ICO has just started, and yes, I know it's July and the GDPR came into force in May, a big consultation about how sites for children should be designed, taking data privacy in mind and taking into account the fact that children's understanding of GDPR is bound to be suitable for a child. So we're going to need special data privacy policies and that sort of thing. So today I can't tell you what the outcome of that is or what the rules are. I expect we'll be discussing that in the autumn if we're lucky. But if you do have a site aimed at children, there's certainly a great deal you can do now to get ready for those rules by going through the GDPR audit process in our groups. If you're not a member of our early years group, check the website address coffeeclatch.co.uk/GDPR and pick up the early years information. You don't have to wait until the new guidance is out to start making sure that your site is suitable for children. The first thing you need to be aware of is children's capacity to consent. It's maybe one basis for you processing data. So if you're marketing to children or putting children on a mailing list, be aware of the fact that children under 13 in England and Wales need the consent of a guardian. You cannot just go, little Johnny, age 9, said yes to this. 13 plus, they can consent, but you need to make sure that it's very, very clear to them in children's language and children's understanding what they are consenting to. This is something I expect us to work as a group on once the new guidance is set out so that we can produce child-friendly data protection policies. But what we already know is that many of the data privacy policies we're seeing are inscrutable to adults. So if they don't make a word of sense to an adult, they're hardly going to make any sense to a 13-year-old. A great way to test your language and understanding is to read your policy to a 13-year-old. If they're still with you at the end and can tell you what it means, you've probably passed the test. If they walked off, as 13-year-olds often do, or have gone to sleep, your policy needs a rewrite. For children under the age of 13, they need the consent of a parent or guardian, but it would be a jolly good idea to make your data privacy policy clear enough, because when they get to 13, you're going to have some mechanism, or going to need some mechanism to say to them, now you're 30, do you want to carry on? And it's going to be a bit of an administrative nightmare if you have one policy for grown-ups to read and another policy for children, unless you've deliberately decided to set your site up that way. If a parent or guardian is giving consent, you need to check that the adult has the right to do so. Now, this is a really tricky area at the moment. What the Information Commissioner is saying in the current guidance is you can use the best available technological means to do this. As far as I can tell, there aren't any obvious technological means to do this, but if you're running a major online site and you need consent, you need to check, perhaps at the very least, that the parent or guardian lives at the same address as the child. How you're going to do this is far from clear, but if this is something you rely on, highlight this firmly in your data audit spreadsheet. Let me know in the early years group or the VA support group, if that's where you are with us, or digital VIPs. And as soon as we get some clarity on this, we will be coming back to you to go, this is what you need to do. Don't anticipate anything before the autumn, but make sure right now you know if you need this or not, because you're going to need to move quickly when you get it. The technological side is developing really quickly. I think some enterprising person is going to develop an app or something you can put on your website that goes, this is the address, is that parent or guardian registered on the electoral roll at the same address as the child? It won't cover all eventualities, but it will probably be a help. Some bright startup is doing this right now, and there'll obviously be other things to follow. But consent is not the only issue. You need to look at where you're storing information about children. Is it inside the European Economic Area, which is the EU countries plus Switzerland and Norway? If it is, you don't have any extra processes to worry about beyond the normal GDPR ones and beyond the ones that apply to children. But if you are using sites that export data to the USA, and a lot of mailing lists and mainstream websites do that, you need to make sure the parent or guardian knows this and that you are following absolute rules for security. Letting children's data drift in an insecure environment globally is not the way to go. If you're not sure about USA data and privacy shields and exporting data outside the EU, the rules for children are exactly the same as they are for adults. You need to make sure they know. But you also need to find a way to explain this to 13-year-olds, and that's going to be fun. We don't collect children's data, but perhaps if I did, I'd try and keep it inside the EU because it's one step less to worry about. Lots of people outsource data to India for data processing. You should be aware that India has only just introduced a Data Protection Act, and the only way to meet these rules is to have a really strong contract on data processing and to make sure the security is right. if you're running a small chain of nurseries or dance groups aimed at children, this is, with great respect, probably way above your pay grade, and it might be simpler for you to comply by keeping your information inside the European area. And if you're based in the UK, you might want to think about keeping it inside the UK. It's not illegal to send it somewhere else, but it saves you a lot of things that you otherwise are going to take time to do. Most children's providers of services use mainstream software like MailChimp if you have an email list. It's not always as bad as it seems, but be aware that some of the health and beauty platforms that allow you to organize classes that may allow booking for children are not adequately secure, even for adults, never mind children. Review your platforms. You don't just have to process data with consent. Just as with adults, we've had an awful lot about consent, and people have forgotten, completely forgotten, that that's not the only reason why you would process data. You may, if you're running a playgroup or a school, have a legal obligation to process data about children. Especially with children, you need to be able to go, such and such an Act of Parliament, paragraph 9 to 30, requires me to do this. Now, I'm not saying you become a lawyer, but we can talk about this in the early years GDPR group and start building a library of legal obligations to keep data about children. The reason why I suggest we go this way as a group is that people often go, the law tells me to do it. And when I get back to them and I go, that's very interesting, what law? They can't name it. Now, if you're relying on a legal obligation to process data about children, when a parent or the Information Commissioner challenges you, it's not good enough to go, the law requires me to. Because you might actually be wrong. It's much better that you check it out now. So if you're working on the basis of a legal obligation, then you need to be sure what it is. Come into the groups and start telling us what you think it is, and we will start producing a list. So have a look at the other bases. We've talked about identifying the specific law. You could be looking at the vital interest of the child. That probably wouldn't cover photography, but obviously if you are a social worker trying to safeguard a child, if you are a health worker trying to safeguard a child, you may be holding information in order to safeguard the child. You wouldn't be seeking consent from that. But you have to be very careful that, again, that you can point to a vital interest of the child. You can't just go, it's good for children, or this is to protect them. You have to go, we have a policy that safeguards the child. That means that we collect this information for this reason. We can't be woolly when it comes to children. Nobody who runs a business in the UK can go, I'm exempt because I'm a psychologist or a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or, runs an organization. The reality is we are all covered, but we have all got specific bits that we can rely on that are different. So your psychologist is probably thinking, I don't need consent because that's not what I do. And obviously if they market directly to children, they will need consent. If they market to adults, they need consent. That's about how direct mail campaigns are done online. There's no exemption, but the vital interest could be keeping the information about the child for when they do a repeat visit. You wouldn't need consent to that because now you're looking after the child's health. So what about looking after children in the care to protect their anonymity? Well, yes, the vital interest of the child may require you to keep some information about them. Could be on the grounds of their health, their education, or their safety, right? And that will cover the dance teacher, all sorts of things like that. But you need to look at the principle of minimization. And for those of you who are regulars on our webinars, we've discussed this before. This is minimizing the amount of data you collect It could be anonymising it where that's appropriate. You might actually be able to go, child number 1 is in this foster home, child number 2 is in that. You don't always have to name a child everywhere you record information about them. But it's also minimising who's got access to the data. A lot of old databases and schemes are flat. And this is, by flat I mean, that anyone who's got access to any of the data has got access to all of the data. When it comes to health data for adults or any data about children, we should be looking at restricting access to people who need it, but not necessarily giving people who need it access to everything. We should be taking a more nuanced and layered approach. So when it comes to safeguarding, you may well need to give certain information to people, but you don't necessarily need to give all the information to a child about absolutely everybody. So we do have to keep children's information for extremely long periods of time, and we are going to have to build in my opinion, and this is going to come out with the consultations that are going on at the moment. Please respond to the Information Commissioner's consultation on privacy by design for children, because that would be really helpful. Some way of getting hold of them. Now, of course, one of the problems we've got with data retention, particularly on things like vital interest, is that we have an obligation to keep that information up to date. But if the parent or guardian changes, for example, if a dad gave permission for us to keep data about a child and then the dad separates from the family and the family move, we may not always be in a position to keep that information up to date. Obviously, if you're a government agency or social services, you have different ways to do this. But if you are a sports therapist or a psychologist who treated a 7-year-old whose family disappeared, you may have to simply archive that information and mark it as probably not up to date. But obviously, if anyone makes an inquiry to you of, are you holding data about me, and they are now the adult that once was the child, you're going to need to say yes. You can't just let it all disappear. But yes, in an ideal world, children should know and be updated what's being held on them. Does that make sense? What the appropriate age is, I think depends a little bit on the information. Telling a 13-year-old who's in a dance class or scouts, you do know we've got a file on you, and by the way, can have a look at it, could be quite an interesting exercise in social education and training, particularly for someone like the Scouts to undertake. I think it would be brilliant if kids saw what information people had on them. Might stop them posting many silly things on the internet. But if it is a mental health issue and the child's been diagnosed with a severe mental health condition, 13 may not be an appropriate age to do that. I think there's a judgment call there, particularly when it comes to vital interest. Where we need to be really careful, and I'm not sure the extent to which this is going on, and I'll be really interested to get this feedback in the groups from those of you who were doing the data audits, is you need to be really careful about automated profiling of children. That covers marketeers who are going, if the child likes football, we'll send them that if it's automated. And obviously anything that's being used to recruit or select them into programs or out of programs, because this is a very tricky area for children who are much more malleable than us. So automated decision making, if you run a school that's oversubscribed and you've got little robots that make the shortlist, you need to be extremely careful how you're using these, because these decisions will affect children possibly well into their adult life. So Girl Guiding and Scouts need support with this. But I actually think it could almost be like a guiding and scouting badge to go GDPR citizen. Part of your citizenship. Wouldn't it be great to do a summer badge around the age of 13 to get children to research what information is held on them, make data subject access requests, explore who they're sharing what with, and actually understand that digital citizenship is something we all need to be fluent in. I would love to do that project with the Scouts and the Guides. But I think the ultimate answer to GDPR is an informed citizenship that actually understand what's going on. And that's going to be an ongoing education process, because what's going on is changing. And wouldn't it be great to get the brownies to understand enough about this to write the child-friendly GDPR policy that other children can understand? By the way, there are already guidelines on how to consult with children. Yep, and definitely GDPR duck on the badge, got to be available from the ICO, because obviously you need to be very careful when you're consulting with children not to make the questions lead them to the conclusion that you want. But yes, a duck GDPR brownie badge would be a great thing, wouldn't it? The educated, informed data citizens. You need to be very restrictive about how all this automated stuff is going on, because we are in the age of artificial intelligence. Now, this to me is killingly funny, because personally I've been on a lifetime's quest for the real thing, and artificial intelligence to me is like having aspartame instead of sugar. You know, if you need sweetness, have sugar. If you don't take it. But I do understand that there is a shortage of actual intelligence in the world, and we are going to have to go with the artificial substitute. But we need to be extremely careful what artificial intelligence bots we set on children's data, and restrict that enormously until we have some idea what we're doing, and until somebody's decided how much is right. How much artificial intelligence decision making would you want applied to your children? Not a lot, I would suggest. This thing of age-appropriate privacy policies is going to be a challenge. If you've been working with us so far, you will know that producing clear privacy policies for adults has been a challenge. And a lot of the ones we've reviewed as a group or had a look at have frankly been unintelligible. And if we don't understand them, and we've been studying GDPR, some of us together for more than a year, how in heaven's name does anyone expect anyone else to? The additional challenge with children is, of course, language. Lots of surveys suggest that in adults, you shouldn't go for language that the average 11-year-old can't understand. But if we're starting to produce age-appropriate privacy policies for, say, a 7-year-old to discuss with their parent, or an 11-year-old as they start to get up towards the age when their own consent and their own data makes sense to them, we've got to do a great deal better than we've done so far. I can't say that I've come up with anything that would work, but I am very willing to work with people who work with children in our early years groups to see if we can come up with something that makes sense. I bet you anything you like, when we've got it right for children, we can probably say we've got it right for adults. Because the thing we should never forget is that while we have studied lots of words, most people have read absolutely nothing about this, and they don't understand the long policies that everyone's sending them right now. I think if you did a test with your friends and gave them the top 10 platforms that we use, privacy policies, and said, what do they mean? I'd be astonished if most people could give you an accurate summary. And that brings me on to one of the great principles of GDPR, which is transparency. Not just for children, additional transparency for children, because we've got to make sure their parents know what we're doing with the information, and we've got to make sure that they have appropriate transparency about what we're doing with it as well. This is going to be a challenge. But if we can get the brownies and the guides and even schools doing digital citizenship courses, it would help if the audience we're addressing at least had some familiarity with the concepts. When we started GDPR, I discovered that most people who kept information in the cloud had no idea that it could be in any country in the world. We can't be transparent without education. So if you're a major provider of information to children, or you are using information about children, part of your GDPR role has got to be educational. And that is time and money invested. Personally, I think we need to make this investment so that we do create an understanding, an educated body of people who can talk about this and deal with this as we face the challenges that artificial intelligence, extra technology, the robot age is going to bring. The other thing, and I know I always talk about this, is that we have got to have contracts and policies that bring this into effect. If you're running a nursery and you're outsourcing your admin to a VA or a bookkeeper, you need to be sure that they are properly contracted for privacy and that you have appropriate policies that you and they can understand and be in line with. It is so easy to see GDPR as paperwork, but it's much easier to see the paperwork as something that reflects the processes and the thinking that you've already done. It is going to be a mission bringing GDPR and children into line. I don't think we are going to do this in 6 weeks this summer. We need to start the process of letting everybody know what the rules are. We need to engage with the Information Commissioner when it comes to understanding what's going on. Do not stay outside of their process. Now, Angie's asked all sorts of questions about safeguarding, and I know we've got people in the room who are very active in organisations where children's safeguarding and care is a very big deal. I'm not a specialist in sort of early years care, but my understanding of it from the groups is that while GDPR is a national and indeed international set of standards, one of the interesting things about safeguarding is that each local council seems to set slightly different rules. So we don't seem to be on a single platform of safeguarding standards, because certainly to me, it appears that the safeguarding in Yorkshire is not identical. Obviously, the aim's identical, but the methodologies, the boxes you need to tick don't seem to be the same. So I'd be very interested to know what you are finding out there, because this is something too I think we're going to need to collate, because if we're supporting people with a national business, they need to know the regional variations if they hit them. And I, for one, am bamboozled by it. The other thing I think we need to take on board when it comes to the legal side of things and the necessity to keep data is there's a lot of child development stuff that people are obliged to keep: nurseries, schools, early years centres, and they too seem to have me taking photographs of children doing certain things. We've had queries live in the group already of people saying, well, I have to take photographs of children doing this or that, and I have to keep that as evidence for Ofsted, and they may come round at any time in the next 7 years, but the child's left the nursery, and what if the parent says, delete all data about my child? Now, obviously, you wouldn't be deleting all data about the child, because you would be keeping some of this stuff as a legitimate interest in protecting you and your business, wouldn't you? But you are going to have to get alongside GDPR as a process, and not a deadline, as most of us here know, as the Information Commission officer brings all this stuff into mind. Now, has anybody actually seen the consultation stuff and has any thoughts about it? I'm not going to go into it in great depth today, but we are very famous as micro businesses because it's a big investment of time in going, I haven't seen the consultation, I didn't respond, and then later on, oh my goodness, they've developed a law and I don't like it and it's deeply impractical. I think we need to take a little bit of time to look at the Information Commissioner stuff about privacy by design, because if we're not careful, we're going to end up with a system that only works for big businesses. And one of the things I think that our micro clients are facing is this massive problem that when the rules come, they don't know how to comply with it. And maybe we can all take an hour in the next couple of weeks to respond to the Information Commissioner and start getting the micro business, the small nursery, the dance studio, the local scout group on the agenda before someone frightens them to death at the end of the year with 60 pages of regulation that is not really what they are able to deal with. It is the combination of health data and children's data is interesting, because health data needs special security rules and children need a little bit more than that. And in a way, that if you can get it right with health data about children, you've probably really mastered GDPR, because that's where all the complications come in, particularly if you're going to collect information about diet, which may come into religion and all sorts of things. If the gummies and the brownies are not in there, you know what's going to happen. We're going to have people saying at Christmas, who invented these stupid laws, and none of us can comply with it. So part of my little campaign for digital citizenship is that we start responding to consultations and go, I work with X number of businesses who do this, I work with others. You know, it's not just me sitting in my back bedroom thinking that. I've tried to get the VA groups to do this, but there's not a lot of interest as a group. They don't want to become a body representing VAs. They see themselves as a body supporting VAs. So I'm afraid it's down to us. But if you could start sharing this consultation, I'd be very happy if no one knows what the consultation document means to run through that with people. They're not easy. When government consults, they consult in government language. And the first time you read it, you think this is a big mistake. What? But if you ignore it and go too tricky, you get a law that's too tricky. And if your view is that the consultation is hard to understand, as part of the consultation, you need to go, it's really hard to understand the consultation. And if you're going to produce a law that's as difficult as this, I'm here to tell you that people don't understand it. One of my concerns about GDPR and children and the new regulations we're going to get is that a significant number of people who work with children are volunteers, and therefore they don't have a lot of background and expertise in interpreting law. And we saw this when GDPR came in, people started to panic, and we really don't want to make it any more difficult than it is for people who volunteer to work with children. We also have another group of people who run micro businesses, dance studios, yoga studios, that are aimed at children. And we do not want these people to stop doing what they do, because they are the fabric of a lot of everybody's children's experiences. We need music teachers and private French tutors and all these other people, but we also need our children's data not to be randomly distributed. What's interesting about the children's sector to me, and I'll be interested in your feedback on this, is probably the least digitalised of businesses. The online element is tiny compared to a lot of other business models, but they still need to secure the physical data that they hold. And I'm seeing some very interesting lack of understanding about that. And I would really hate to think that anybody's children's details could be burgled from the local voluntary after schools club just because nobody's realised that having a secure lockable cabinet would be a good place to start. So we have work to do, and the schools themselves are far from getting it right, and I don't blame them because they've got a lot on, what with Ofsted and end of year exams. I mean, introducing this in May when we've got O-levels, A-levels and end of term going on through June and July is insane, really. I'm hoping that they will get on top of this, as an ongoing process, but schools do have a lot to do. They're under an awful lot of pressure, and somehow we have to encourage the best practice in the interest of our children or our potential grandchildren and in the interest of our customers. But it is, again, very variable across the country, across the regions and across the schools. There's different practices in different LEAs, different practices in different academies. It will come together, but we are still far from done. Which makes me laugh, because I published something yesterday about GDPR on my own timeline, and someone got hold of me and said, but that's like talking about the year 2000 problem. We did GDPR on May 25th. Now, I don't know whether, I think the guy probably knew very little about it. It was quite shocking. Turns out he was a digital marketeer, which is quite a chilling idea, that with all this coming through about marketing to children, all this yet to come about all sorts of other things, he's under the impression that GDPR happened on May 25th, and that's the end of that. So thank you for joining me. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.